Money, especially obscenely large ones, has one very insidious property. It tends to run out. Even the most gigantic capital can be wasted if you forget this simple truth in time. The stories of the Vanderbilts, Pulitzer, and other once all-powerful dynasties of the planet are clear and very instructive evidence of this. According to ruthless statistics, about 70% of the wealthy families lose all their hard-earned possessions in the second generation. Further, it is more devastating. On average, only 1 in 10 great-grandchildren manages not only to keep afloat, but also to multiply the financial legacy of their ancestors. This decadent dynamic was brilliantly described by the German classic Thomas Mann in his famous novel Buddenbrooks. The pattern of collapse is the same everywhere. The first generation fanatically forges money by the sweat of its brow. The second generation rests on, he cares less about business, but passionately longs for recognition in high society. Well, the pampered representatives of the third, still possessing solid bank accounts, expensive mansions, and impeccable social status, go into art, sports, and have an extremely vague idea of real life outside of elite private boarding schools. In the middle of the 19th century, Cornelius Vanderbilt became the undisputed king of American business. He built his grand empire on intercontinental transportation and aggressive railway construction. Fantastic. But the initial $100 borrowed from his own mother to buy his first barge had turned into an astronomical $100 million by the end of his life. Taking into account modern inflation, his fortune is equivalent to about $205 billion. This monumentally makes Commander Vanderbilt the second richest man in the history of the United States. By the way, the iconic billionaire Bill Gates ranks only a modest 12th in this historical ranking. However, the stern patriarch of the family himself fit into the refined high society of New York with tremendous difficulty. He remained a rude adventurer, masterly. He cursed and spat tobacco juice right on the expensive carpets, like a longshoreman. Alas, this unfortunate lack of refined manners was amply corrected by his descendants. They are so addicted to the intoxicating game of aristocracy that the answer to the classic question, "Where is the money?" in this case is banal, to the point of indecency. Billions disappeared into pompous castles in the style of the French Renaissance, cyclopean ocean yachts, luxurious parties, thoroughbred horses, and fabulously expensive cars. The legendary man-eating Elichka from the 12 Chairs, with her Mexican carcass, would have been completely avenged if she had learned the bitter ending of this tale. In 1973, the official Congress of the descendants of the family, there were 120 Vanderbilts, and not a single millionaire among them. 300 million disappeared into thin air in just a couple of generations. The founding father of this media empire is the legendary Joseph Pulitzer, 1847 to 1911, an American journalist and publisher of Hungarian origin. A man of frenzied energy, he has made a real revolution in the media business and is rightfully considered the father of the so-called yellow press. When the ambitious Pulitzer bought out the fading newspaper The New York World, its circulation was a nondescript 15,000 subscribers. Just 12 years later, thanks to high-profile sensations, flashy headlines, and illustrations, the circulation soared to 600,000 copies, turning the publication into the most widely read and influential in the United States. Before his death, Joseph, who was blind and suffering from illnesses, donated a huge part of his capital to charity. It was with his generous donations that the famous Pulitzer Prize was founded, which became a kind of Oscar in the world of journalism and literature. He left his sons an excellent fortune of $30 million. Today, it is a significant $700 million. But things went completely differently for the successors. His father left a more modest share to his unloved, obstinate son, Joseph Jr., the provincial newspaper, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Strangely enough, it was this branch of the family that did not hit the dirt on their face. They competently developed the business and sold the publication to the media giant Lee Enterprises only in 2005 for a genuinely respectable $1.46 billion. But his father's favorites, Ralph and Herbert, got their hands on the pearl of the empire, the flagship of the New York world. Instead of developing the business, the brothers began to shamelessly put their hand into the corporate cash register for financing your whims. The result is logical. Just 20 years later, they bankrupted the great newspaper and were forced to sell it to competitors for next to nothing. The heirs of the next generations are completely mired in scandals and lawsuits. The grandson of the media mogul, Herbert Peter Pulitzer, was saved from complete financial ruin. Oh, the edges of secular decency. The fourth husband of his own ex-wife, who generously bought out the mortgage on his luxurious estate in Palm Beach and vouched for the poor guy for a new bank loan. The story of Bernhard Stroh is a classic, textbook example of the embodiment of the American dream. Arriving in the United States from Germany, with only $150 in his pocket and an old family recipe for brewing German beer carefully recorded, the immigrant managed to create a colossal brewing empire from scratch. His heirs held the brand for a long time. They showed wonders of commercial flexibility, safely surviving the harsh years of Prohibition. They produced ice cream and non-alcoholic malt syrup, and in 1988 triumphantly broke into the list of the richest families in America, according to Forbes, with a total fortune of $700 million. Their company, Stroh Brewery, confidently occupied the honorable third largest place in the entire giant beer market of the USA. And then, everything went downhill. Melly, the ambitious but short-sighted management of the company, wanted to take a bigger bite out of the national market, which provoked a fatal series of stupid business decisions. Melly. To begin with, the family council decided to absorb one of the main competitors, the brand Schlitz. Now, to pull off the deal, they borrowed $500 million from banks, an amount that was exactly 5 times the market capitalization of Stroh Brewery itself at that time. Next, top managers missed the tectonic shift in consumer culture. In America, the fashion for diet light beer was growing rapidly, and conservative brewers continued to brew heavy classic varieties. They put the last nail in their financial coffin when, amid falling sales, they managed to take out another loan for $300 million. Trying frantically to save the remnants of their former greatness, the heirs rushed to invest in hype biotechnology and commercial real estate, were areas in which they knew absolutely nothing. As a result, in 2000, the once great company had to be shamefully sold off in parts, with the lion's share of the proceeds going solely to cover huge debts to creditors. The dynasty was left at a broken trough. The founder of this business clan, George Huntington Hartford, worked for a long time as a modest manager, but eventually became the rightful owner of the world's oldest and legendary chain of retail supermarkets, A&P, the Great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company. By 1915, this empire was the largest and most successful trading network on the planet. Exactly 100 years later, in 2015, it finally ceased to exist as a result of a shameful bankruptcy. However, by this point, the Hartfords themselves had nothing to do with the company for a long time. They had to completely sell the family business back in the early 50s. The fascinating trajectory of where and at what speed the great millions are going can be clearly traced using the example of George Huntington Hartford Jr., the grandson of the founder of the empire. At the tender age of 11, the boy inherited a trust fund. The fund, which in terms of today's money, was worth a solid $1.2 billion. And from that moment on, his personal grandiose quest called How to Get $1 Billion Guaranteed began. The eccentric heir brilliantly coped with this task by 1992, when he officially filed for bankruptcy. His recipe for financial suicide is simple, elegant, and fascinating in its own way. Step 1. Do your best to be fired from the family company in disgrace. To achieve such an outstanding result, George simply ignored meetings, preferring to spend his working hours in the stands of football matches. Step 2. Make sure you get kicked out of the second one as well. He started working as an aspiring reporter for a New York newspaper. To do this, it's enough to disrupt the most important deadline, and to the furious cries of the editor-in-chief, without batting an eye, you simply couldn't find a convenient place to park your huge yacht for a damn long time, and therefore you were late to the editorial office. Step 3. Choose exclusively planned, unprofitable, and dubious projects as your personal business endeavors. George enthusiastically poured millions into a modeling agency, sponsored notoriously disastrous Broadway productions, and built an insanely expensive resort in the Bahamas. He opened unprofitable cafes in New York's Central Park and built his own art museum to showcase paintings that critics despised. Don't forget to spice up this crazy mix with 4 grandiose, ruinous divorces and endless dates with Hollywood divas of the first magnitude of the caliber of Lana Turner. And voila! Before you know it, once inexhaustible family billions, only bundles of lawsuits and pleasant nostalgic memories will remain. The former playboy lived out his life in a modest, rented house in the Bahamas, surviving on a small monthly allowance from his daughter. A small monthly allowance from my daughter. The founding father of this dynasty, Jason J. Gould, amassed his enormous wealth through aggressive railroad development and ruthless gold fraud. Of course, when it comes to big money, concepts such as honesty, decency, and humanism are often thrown out the window as unnecessary. However, the patriarch of the Gould family managed to stand out with his absolute, chilling unscrupulousness, even against the background of other cynical barons, the robbers of the golden age of American capitalism. He coldly framed long-term associates, bought up judges and officials in bulk, and once, for the sake of profit, simply kidnapped a major potential investor. It was his aggressive speculation on the stock exchange that led to the famous financial disaster, the Black Friday of 1869. Gould is credited with an ominous and harsh phrase, thrown by him during a large-scale strike of railway workers. "I can hire one half of the working class to shoot the other half." Such an iron, merciless hand brought Gould a fortune that, adjusted for inflation, would amount to a phenomenal $71.2 billion these days. This automatically puts him on the 9th line in the list of the richest people in the history of America. but karma is an inexorable thing. Hima, his eldest son, George J. Gould, who inherited the empire, disposed of his father's gold so poorly that the third generation of Gould, after paying all the accumulated debts, fines, and taxes, got mere crumbs, an amount equivalent to today's $90 million. The reasons for the decline of this once all-powerful family turned out to be quite standard for the curse of the third generation. Absolutely incompetent management, a series of lost lawsuits from deceived relatives, and incredibly expensive, destructive aristocratic habits. The legacy of the predatory robber baron evaporated as quickly as it was acquired.